Hello, in this video, we are going to continue talking about genetics by talking about Punnett squares and how we can use a Punnett square to predict inheritance. So in a previous video, I went over the difference between phenotype and genotype and also explained how we can use letters to designate dominant versus recessive alleles. And so we had this diagram here where we're looking at the different inheritance that Mendel saw for pea plants. And so we're going to use Punnett squares to actually show where we get these numbers from. Why did Mendel get the, 100% are going to be yellow, and then later, 75% are yellow and 25% ended up being green. And so we're going to use Punnett squares to predict inheritance. So the way you set up a square is, first of all, you're going to want a 2x2 square. And you're going to put one of the parents' alleles on the top, and you're going to separate the alleles. So if one of the parents is lowercase n for whatever gene or allele, you're going to separate the two n's like that. And then the other parent, if it's capital N, lowercase n in this case, you would just, again, separate the two letters out like that. And so both parents, and it doesn't matter which parent goes where, as long as one parent is at the top and one parent is along the side, and you've separated their alleles. Then you just fill in the boxes inside. So I'll just start with the top row here. And so I see a capital N, so I'm going to put one there, and then the lowercase n is there. This capital N is coming from here, and then the lowercase n from here. And then you just go down the bottom row as well. So we have a lowercase n for that row, and then the column is also a lowercase n, and then same thing here and same thing there. So that is pretty much how you fill in the Punnett square. And what the boxes inside of the Punnett square represent are the possible genotypes of the offspring, and it also gives you a ratio. So for example, the offspring here, half of the offspring, 50% of the offspring, are going to be uppercase and lowercase n, also known as heterozygous. And then 50% of the offspring are going to be the homozygous recessive. Now, in terms of the phenotypic ratio or phenotype, let's just say that this was for, I'm just going to make up a phenotype. So let's say that the capital N represents, black hair, and the lowercase n is representing blonde hair. And so what we would see in the heterozygous, remember that dominant will always show up if you have a capital and a lowercase. And so in this case, all of these are going to have the black hair. And then these individuals, these individuals are all going to be blonde. Okay. And we don't have anyone that is capital N, but if anyone was capital N, they would also have black hair. Let me fix that. And so those are your phenotypic ratios, 50% black hair, 50% blonde, which happens in this specific case to also be the same as the genotypic ratio. But it is not always the case, but in this specific case it is. So that's how you would set up a square. And again, you would be given the two parents' alleles, and that's how you would fill in the Punnett square. Now, there are some special Punnett squares, and one special Punnett square is called the test cross. So let's say you have an organism that is dominant for a specific trait. So let's go back to Mendel's pea plants. Yellow is dominant for the pea color. But let's say that Mendel doesn't know if this pea plant is capital Y or capital Y lowercase. Remember that as long as you have one capital letter, you're going to have the dominant trait. And so this yellow pea plant could be big Y or big Y little. We don't know. And so we're going to do a test cross to try to figure this out. So right now we have this unknown organism that is dominant, but we don't know if it's capital Y, or if it's heterozygous. So what we do with the test cross is you're going to get your unknown and you're going to cross it with a recessive. And we do the recessive because we know the genotype of the recessive. It will always be lowercase y. To have a pea plant that is green, it has to be the double recessive or homozygous recessive. And what you do is you do the cross and you figure out what the offspring looks like. And the outcome of the offspring will determine what your unknown is. Because if your parent was capital Y, let me just change that to capital Y, then all of your offspring are going to be big Y, little y, if you fill in the Punnett square. And that would basically tell you that the parent is homozygous dominant. Now, if your parent was heterozygous, so if this was a capital Y, lowercase y, then that would be the only situation where you would have half of the offspring yellow and half of the offspring green, or in this case, half of the offspring having the dominant trait and half of the offspring having the recessive trait. And so this is one of the kind of special types of Punnett squares or special types of crosses where you are trying to figure out an unknown's genotype. And of course, this would only be the case if your unknown is dominant in phenotype, right? If your organism is recessive in phenotype, you automatically know that it's going to be the homozygous recessive. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about is another kind of interesting situation when it comes to traits that are what we call sex-linked. So sex-linked means that the gene is found specifically on the X chromosome. And that is going to be interesting because depending on if you're biologically male or biologically female, you're going to have a different number of X chromosomes. So biological females have XX as their sex chromosomes, whereas biological males have XY. And so the Y chromosome does not carry whatever X-linked gene it is. So let's just give the example of fruit flies. In fruit flies, the eye color is on the X chromosome. And so the way we designate it is X with a W. The W is just for the eye color. And then the Y chromosome, notice, has no letter associated with it because it does not carry the actual gene for eye color. Only the X chromosome does. And so this makes things a little bit interesting in terms of inheritance, specifically for the males, because males will always obtain their Y chromosome from their father and their X chromosome from their mother, because the Y chromosome is only found in the father. And so that's where the male has to get its Y chromosome from. And so this guarantees that, for example, here in this specific situation, the white eye color for flies is found in the mother. And so she has X lowercase w, X lowercase w. By the way, white eyes is recessive. And the red eyes is going to be found in the father, which is the uppercase W. And remember, he only carries one copy. Now, what ends up happening is when you do the Punnett square, remember that you're going to have half of your offspring be female and half of your offspring be male. But notice that all the males have the white eyes and all the females have the red eyes. And the reason why is because the females automatically inherit one of their X chromosomes from their father. So both of the female children are going to have an X chromosome from their father, and then randomly whichever X chromosome from their mother. But it doesn't matter because the father carries the dominant red eyes, so the female offspring are all going to have the dominant red eyes. Now, if we look at the male offspring, it's totally different, because with the male offspring, no matter what happens, they're always going to get the Y chromosome from dad. And so their only option is to get one of the X chromosomes from mom. And it doesn't matter because since mom is double recessive or homozygous recessive, they're going to obtain the white eye gene from mom. And so as you can see, this is different from what we usually see in a Punnett square in terms of how inheritance works. And so inheritance probabilities are just different when it comes to X-linked traits. It's going to be different for the females and different for the males. And yeah, that is just another nuance that I wanted to discuss. Hopefully this video was helpful, and I will see you in the next video.